Ohio means the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Wright Brothers, and a lot of corn. But if you've lived in Ohio long enough, there's a good chance you've passed places where entire communities once lived without ever realizing it. Across this state are towns that disappeared, communities that were forced to leave, and stories that are hard to believe happened in Ohio at all. These are 12 ghost towns in Ohio, and number 1 is the one people still talk about today. Number 12. Cheshire, Ohio. A coal power plant was burning next to a small Ohio river town of 450 people. The air burned residents' throats, stripped the paint off their cars, and left sulfur dioxide levels that violated the Clean Air Act. American Electric Power's Gavin plant decided in 2002 that cleaning up the pollution would cost more than buying the town, so they bought it, the whole thing, $20 million, 3.5 times assessed value, on the condition that every resident signed a waiver giving up any right to sue for future health damage. Cheshire, Ohio became a ghost town because a corporation calculated that erasing it was cheaper than fixing what they had done to it. The plant's 800-foot smokestacks had towered over the village for nearly 3 decades as residents complained about the air, the water, the yellow residue on their houses, the health problems they attributed to the emissions. The EPA cited the plant for Clean Air Act violations in 2000 and lawsuits were building. The buyout offer arrived in 2002. 3.5 times market value was significant for residents of a small Ohio River village. Most took it, all who accepted signed the liability waiver, and the buildings were demolished and the streets cleared. One resident, an 83-year-old woman named Beulah Hearn, refused to sell and stayed in her house, surrounded by empty lots where her neighbors' homes had been, in the shadow of the smokestacks, for years afterward. Today, the Gavin plant still operates on the Ohio River. The site of the village it bought and erased is a cleared field, the 800-foot smokestack still standing over it, the coal ash ponds still leaching into the groundwater below. What American Electric Power bought in 2002 was not a ghost town. It was silence. Number 11. Helltown, Ohio. The federal government forced everyone out of Boston Township, Ohio in 1974, not for a dam, not for a military base, but to build Cuyahoga Valley National Park. Families who had lived there for generations received notices that their land was being acquired under eminent domain. When they left, many houses were simply left standing, boarded up, no trespassing signs on the doors, belongings still inside. Boston Village had been settled in 1806 and grown through the 19th century as a mill town and canal hub along the Cuyahoga River. The Cuyahoga River famously had caught fire in 1969, so polluted it burned, and Congress designated the surrounding valley as a national recreation area in 1974 to begin the long cleanup. The residents of Boston Township were caught in the boundary. The government named it a national recreation area. The locals called it Helltown. The forced evacuation produced exactly the kind of raw material that legends need. Abandoned houses from the 1970s, belongings still visible through windows, government road-closed signs on streets people used to walk every day. Stories followed almost immediately. A satanic cult meeting in a church with upside-down crosses on the exterior, a giant mutated snake called the Peninsula Python lurking in the woods, a gravity-defying road, a crashed school bus whose ghosts appeared in car mirrors. None of the legends were true, but the anger behind them, the specific, unresolved resentment of a community told their neighborhood was being converted to a park, was absolutely real. Helltown became one of the most famous haunted destinations in Ohio, not because of ghosts, but because of what it felt like to watch your home become a government project. Today, almost all the physical structures have been demolished, and the legend of Helltown, built entirely on the experience of people who were simply told to leave, lives on in travel guides, ghost hunting channels, and a Travel Channel special that was almost entirely fictional. Number 10. Moonville, Ohio. Moonville was a coal mining community of about 100 people in the hills of Vinton County with no roads in or out, ever. The only way to reach any other town was to walk the active railroad tracks. That explains the 26 documented deaths near a single tunnel, the the ghost stories that have run in local newspapers since 1895, and the railroad signal that was installed in 1980 specifically because train engineers kept seeing a ghost. The Marietta and Cincinnati Railroad pushed an 8-mile line through southeastern Ohio in 1856, and Moonville grew up along it. A general store, a saloon, a handful of houses, a cemetery. When you needed supplies, you walked the tracks. When you were coming home from a night at a neighboring town's saloon, you walked. Over the decades, at least 26 people died near the Moonville Tunnel, hit by trains they didn't hear coming or didn't move from in time. In 1980, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad installed a safety signal at the tunnel after engineers kept spotting a figure swinging a lantern and hitting emergency brakes. Workers were told to ignore any lantern in the tunnel and use only the designated signal. The lantern legend had been in local newspapers since at least 1895. The mines shut down in the early 1900s. The last family left in 1947. The buildings were gone by the 1960s, and the rail line was pulled up in 1988. Today, the Moonville Tunnel stands in Zaleski State Forest, a 270-foot brick-lined tunnel in the middle of the woods, the only thing left from a town of 100 people, with a cemetery behind it and a documented history of unexplained lights that caused a railroad company to change its official operating instructions. Number 9. Gnadenhutton, Ohio. On March 8, 1782, 96 Christian Delaware people, men, women, and children who had converted to the Moravian faith and were farming peacefully, were rounded up by Pennsylvania militia and killed in Gnadenhutton, Ohio. They were not combatants and had committed no hostile acts. The militia had simply decided they were responsible for raids they had not committed. The massacre at Gnadenhutton is one of the most documented atrocities of the Revolutionary War era, and the town that stands there today marks the site where it happened. Gnadenhutton, Tents of Grace in German, was founded in 1772 by Moravian missionaries and the Delaware converts who had accepted Christianity. They had built European-style farms and maintained neutrality in the conflict between American colonists and British allied native groups, the specific kind of peaceful neutrality that made them vulnerable to both sides. The Pennsylvania militia under Colonel David Williamson arrived in March 1782. The Delaware people were told they were being relocated for their own protection. They were allowed to pray and sing hymns through the night. The next morning, 96 of them were killed. 2 boys survived. 1 escaped through a cellar window. 1 hid beneath the bodies of the other victims, and their accounts, delivered to nearby native settlements within days, are the only reason the full documented record of what happened at Gnadenhutton exists at all. George Washington called it a distressing piece of intelligence. It radicalized native alliances against the Americans and shaped the final years of Revolutionary War conflict in the Ohio Territory. Today, Gnadenhutton is a small village with a monument, a museum, and the burial mound where the victims were interred. Not a ghost town in the traditional sense, but the community destroyed there on March 8, 1782 is gone in a way that most ghost towns are not. Number 8. Zoar, Ohio. In 1817, 225 German religious refugees with almost nothing arrived in Tuscarawas County, Ohio, and built one of the most financially successful utopian communes in American history. They paid off their land debt in 5 years, built a textile mill, an iron foundry, a hotel, a brewery, and gardens that people traveled from across the state to see. They ran as a communist collective for 81 years. And then they voted to dissolve because the generation that had grown up comfortable inside the commune wanted to own property, and the founders who had built it in desperation were too old to stop them. The Society of Separatists of Zoar, led by Joseph Bimmeler, held all property in common, temporarily abolished marriage when they couldn't afford to support families, and within 5 years had paid off their entire land debt through collective labor. The community grew to over 500 members and became one of the wealthiest per capita communities in Ohio, not because of ideology, but because communal labor, when disciplined, is genuinely efficient. The commune lasted 81 years. The founders had fled persecution. The next generation had simply grown up inside a successful enterprise and wanted what they had worked for to belong to them. In August 1898, the society held a vote, dissolved itself, and distributed everything equally. Today, Zoar is a National Historic Landmark with over 75 original structures still standing. The garden at the center of the village, laid out as a New Jerusalem, is still maintained. It survived persecution in Germany, the Ohio wilderness, and 81 years of communal living, and what ended it was a vote. Number 7. Knockemstiff, Ohio. Knockemstiff. That is the actual name of an actual place, a tiny hollow in Ross County, Ohio, a few miles outside Chillicothe, that became one of the most discussed literary locations in America when Donald Ray Pollock published his debut short story collection there in 2008. The book is extremely dark. The real Knockemstiff is mostly abandoned. Nobody agrees on where the name came from. Pollock grew up in Knockemstiff and spent 32 years working at a mead paper mill in Chillicothe before his first book was published at age 53. The mill has since closed. The stories he wrote, set in the hollow from the 1950s through the 1980s, draw on that experience directly. Poverty, violence, drugs, deteriorating houses, rusted cars, people with nowhere better to go. The geographic Knockemstiff is quieter than the literary version but follows the same trajectory. The hollow never had much economic foundation, lost what it had as Appalachian Ohio deindustrialized, and is now mostly empty. The church that appears in Pollock's stories is still there. What Knockemstiff represents isn't unique. Hundreds of similar hollows exist across southeastern Ohio, where the coal and iron economy built communities in terrain that couldn't sustain them once the industry left. Knockemstiff just has a name unusual enough and a writer precise enough that the rest of the country was made to understand what that experience looked like from the inside. If the stories of the places nobody talks about are why you watch this channel, drop a comment below and tell me what forgotten town in your state deserves to be on this list. Number 6. Haydenville, Ohio. Every house, every building, every business in Haydenville, Ohio was owned by the same family. Workers were paid in a private currency that could only be spent at the company store. When the company collapsed, the workers discovered they owned nothing, had saved nothing in real money, and had spent years working for currency that was now worthless. They walked away from a complete town and left it to whoever wanted it. William Hayden built his operation in Hocking County in the 1870s around the coal seam and a pottery works that produced glazed brick and drain tiles shipped across the Midwest. The pottery and the mine together employed most of the county. Haydenville had houses, a church, a school, all built and owned by the Hayden family. Every paycheck came back as scrip, and every scrip went back to the company. When the pottery and coal markets shifted and the Hayden operation contracted, the workers discovered what it meant to have spent years earning currency that was only worth something when the company was operating. By the early 20th century, Haydenville was abandoned. The original Haydenville brick buildings, built from the same pottery works that trapped the workers inside the scrip system, still line the main street. The round-arched brick structures are on the National Register of Historic Places, a monument to a company town built on the labor of people who were never allowed to own any of it. Number 5. Santoy, Ohio. Santoy was a coal mining town of nearly 1,000 people in Morgan County where the company didn't just own the buildings. It maintained its own private justice system, its own guards, and complete control over every worker's housing, food, and income simultaneously. When miners tried to organize in the early 1900s, the company's response was simple. A worker who organized could be fired, evicted, and cut off from the only store within reach in a single action. Sunday Creek Coal Company built Santoy in the 1890s, the houses, the store, the church, the school, and charged rent on all of them. Workers were paid in scrip redeemable only at the company store. No public road reached the site. No independent commerce existed there. The company had leverage over the workforce that went beyond wages. The labor disputes at Santoy were investigated and documented by Ohio state labor authorities and became part of the record that led Ohio to restrict scrip currency use in 1896. The miners who organized there paid for it personally, but what they endured contributed directly to the legal limits placed on company towns. Today, Santoy is a hollow in Morgan County. Foundations, old road grades, coal waste piles. The company that controlled every detail of those workers' lives is long gone, and what remains belongs to nobody. Number 4. Sprucevale, Ohio. The Sandy and Beaver Canal was the most ambitious canal project in Ohio. 73 miles, 90 locks, connecting the Ohio River to the Erie Canal through the hill country of eastern Ohio. 90 locks in 73 miles is an extraordinary density, and it explains both why the canal was impressive and why it was financially doomed from the moment it opened. Sprucevale was one of the communities built to serve it, and when the canal failed, Sprucevale had no reason left to exist. The canal passed through Sprucevale in Columbiana County and brought the commercial traffic that made building a mill community there rational. At its peak, Sprucevale had multiple mills, homes, and stores drawing on the water power of Beaver Creek and the trade of the canal. 90 locks required 90 sets of gates, mechanisms, and lockkeepers to maintain. The infrastructure cost more to operate than the traffic it carried could pay for. Then the railroads arrived in the 1850s and moved freight faster and more cheaply, and the canal was finished before it ever turned a profit. Today, Beaver Creek State Park preserves the site: stone walls, mill ruins, the old canal bed. Hikers walk through what was once a working mill town, past walls slowly merging with the limestone hillsides they were built into. The ruins of a community that lasted barely 40 years before the thing it was built around ran out of purpose. Number 3. Shawnee, Ohio. At its peak, Shawnee was a coal mining city of 3,265 people in Perry County, with an opera house that drew professional touring companies from across the country. Today, it has about 650 residents and one of the most intact main streets of Victorian-era commercial architecture in rural Ohio. The buildings built for 3,265 people are still standing. The 3,265 people are not. Shawnee was built in 1879 to serve the Hocking Valley coal seam, and it grew fast. Victorian brick commercial buildings, multiple hotels, churches, schools, and that opera house that told you what kind of future the people who built this town expected to have. The mines began closing in the early 20th century as accessible seams ran out and cheaper coal from West Virginia and Kentucky undercut the Hocking Valley market. The population left for other coal fields, other industries, other states, and the buildings were never demolished because there was no money and no one to do it. Today, you can walk Shawnee's main street and see exactly what a town looks like when it was built for something that never came back. The scale of the buildings, the ambition still visible in the brickwork, the opera house still standing on a street where 2,600 people no longer live. Number 2. Harrisburg, Ohio. In 1812, the Ohio legislature needed to choose a permanent state capital. Harrisburg was one of the candidates. Reasonable location, existing settlement, navigable river access. Columbus was also a candidate. Columbus won because a group of land speculators offered to donate the State House site and pay to lay out the entire new capital's streets themselves. A deal worth roughly $50,000 at 1812 values. Harrisburg had no equivalent offer. Columbus became one of the largest cities in America. Harrisburg became a Pickaway County village with a historical marker. Harrisburg had been growing as a stagecoach stop and small commercial center on the Scioto River since 1802. It was a functional community with the right geography, central location, water access, existing infrastructure. On merit alone, it was a reasonable choice. But Ohio's capital was not chosen on merit. It was chosen on price. The land speculators who championed Columbus donated enough value to make the legislative decision easy, and Harrisburg had nothing comparable to offer. The capital went to Columbus, and the infrastructure that followed, canals, railroads, industry, naturally organized itself around the capital. Harrisburg's decline was not dramatic. No flood, no mine closure, no collapse. The town simply stayed where it was while Ohio built itself in another direction. Today, a few hundred people live there, A historical marker notes what almost happened, and the main street ends where the fields begin. Number 1. Centerville, Ohio. Centerville is not famous, a small township in Montgomery County with no particular historical significance most people would mention. What it represents is the specific kind of Ohio community that stopped being a community without drama. No company collapse, no government eviction, no flood. The railroads and roads chose slightly different routes. The county grew around it rather than through it. And somewhere in the middle of the 20th century, the thing that had made Centerville a distinct community simply was gone. Ohio has hundreds of Centervilles, communities that existed for decades as genuine places with their own identities, post offices, churches, small stores, and the social fabric that makes a collection of houses a town. What distinguished them from the landscape around them was not dramatic. It was a school that drew the children, a store that served the families, a church that marked the calendar. When the school consolidated, the store closed, and the congregation shrank, the town didn't end. It just became the land again. What remains of Centerville is a few historic structures, the absence of whatever markers would have told you this was once its own place, and an Ohio landscape that has no memory of having been otherwise. The people whose grandparents called it home still know where the cemetery is. Everyone else drives past without slowing down. Ohio is full of Centervilles. Every county has at least one, and this is the story they all share. Drop a comment and tell us what place in Ohio you want us to explore next.